Too good at doing the mouth moving and the hand moving at the same time, but that's okay. This is a reading video. I punked you. So, my glasses are a little foggy. I might get interrupted, but if I do and I get quite a bit through the chapter, I'll upload anyway and continue in a bit, but yeah, no. Last time I read, I was in chapter 3, and Igraine was helping Gorloy to undress after a long day, sort of thing, and I'm gonna start where I left off. She hardly slept in the strange bed, turning and tossing as she listened to Gorloy's quiet breathing. Now and again he reached out for her in his sleep, and she soothed him against her breast as she would have done with her child. Perhaps, she thought, the Merlin and the lady were frightened by their own shadows. Perhaps Gorloy will indeed have time to grow old in the sun. Perhaps before he slept, he had indeed planted in her womb the seed of the son they said he would never father. But toward morning she fell into a fitful sleep, dreaming of a world in the mist, of the shoreline of the Holy Isle receding further and further in the mists. It seemed to Igraine that she was rowing on a barge, heavy and exhausted, seeking for the Isle of Avalon, where the goddess, wearing Vivian's face, was waiting to ask her how well she had done what was required of her. But although the shoreline was familiar, as were the groves of apple trees which had grown on the shore when she came up to the temple, a crucifix stood in the temple of her dream, and a choir of the black-robed nuns of the Christians was singing one of their doleful hymns, and when she began to run, looking everywhere for her sister, the sound of church bells drowned out her cries. She woke with a stifled whimper, a sleeper's scream, and sat up to hear the sounds of church bells everywhere. Gorloy sat up in bed beside her. "It is the church where Ambrosius goes to Mass. Make haste to dress yourself, Igraine, and we will go together." While she was winding a woven silk girdle around her linen overdress, a strange serving man knocked at the door, saying he would like to speak with the Lady Igraine, wife of the Duke of Cornwall. Igraine went to the door, and it seemed to her that she recognized the man. He bowed to her, and now she remembered that she had seen him, years ago, rowing Vivian's barge. It made her remember her dream, and she felt cold inside. "Your sister sends you this from the Merlin," he said, "and bids you to wear it and remember your promise. No more." He gave her a small parcel wrapped in silk. "What is this, Igraine?" asked Gorloy, frowning, coming up behind her. "Who is sending you gifts? Do you recognize the messenger?" "He is one of my sister's men from the Isle of Avalon," said Igraine, unwrapping the package, but Gorloy said sternly, "My wife does not receive gifts from messengers unknown to me," and took it roughly from her. She opened her mouth in indignation, all her new tenderness for Gorloy vanishing in a single breath. How dare he? "Why, it is the blue stone you wore when we were wedded," Gorloy said, frowning. "What is this of a promise? How did your sister, if it is truly from her, come by the stone?" Gathering her wits quickly, Igraine lied to him deliberately for the first time in her life. "When my sister visited me," she said, "I gave her the stone and its chain to have the clasp put right. She knows of a goldsmith in Avalon who is better than any in Cornwall. And the promise she spoke of is that I will care better for my jewels, since I am now a grown woman and not a heedless child who cannot take proper care of precious things. May I have my necklace, my husband?" He handed her the moonstone, frowning. "I have smiths in my employ who would have put it right for you without reading you a lesson your sister no longer has a right to give. Vivian takes too much upon herself. She may have stood in a mother's place to you when you were a child, but you are not now in her care. You must strive to be more a grown woman and less dependent upon your home." "Why, now I have 2 lessons," said Igraine crossly, putting the chain about her neck. "One for my sister, and one from my husband, as if I were an unlessoned child indeed. Over his head it seemed that she could still see the shadow of his death, the dread fetch of the death-doomed. Suddenly she hoped, with a passionate hope, that he had not gotten her with child, that she did not bear a son to a doomed man. She felt icy cold. "Come, Igraine," he coaxed, putting out his hand to stroke her hair. "Do not be angry with me. I shall try to remember that you are a grown woman in your 19th year, and not a mere child of 15. Come, we must be ready to go to the king's mass, and the priests do not like it if there is much coming and going after the mass has started." The church was small, made of daub and wattle, and the lamps inside were lighted against the cold dankness. Igraine was glad of her thick wooden mantle. Gorlois whispered to her that the white-haired priest, venerable as any druid, was Ambrosius's own priest, who travelled with the army, and that this was a service of thanksgiving for the king's homecoming. "Is the king here?" "He is just coming into the church, at the seat over there before the altar," Gorlois muttered, inclining his head. She knew him at once by the dark red mantle, worn over a dark, heavily embroidered tunic, and the jewelry sword belt at his side. Ambrosius Aurelianus must, she thought, have been about 60, a tall, spare man, shaven in the Roman fashion, but stooped, walking with a careful crouch as if he had some inner hurt. Once, perhaps, he had been handsome. Now his face was lined and yellow, his dark mustache drooping, nearly all gray, and his hair grizzled. Beside him were 2 or 3 of his counselors, or fellow kings. She wanted to know who they were, but the priest, seeing the king enter, had begun reading from his great book, and she bit her lip and was silent, listening to the service which even now, after 4 years in Father Columba's instruction, she did not fully understand, nor care to. She knew it was ill-mannered to gaze about her in church, like a country bumpkin, but she peeped below the hood of her mantle at some of the men around the king, a man whom she supposed to be Urian of North Wales, and a richly dressed man, slender and handsome, dark hair cut short in Roman fashion around his chin. She wondered if this was Uther, Ambrosius's companion and heir apparent. And that is my signal. I think we are going to have to stop.